So tonight we're talking about saving the ark, religion, and the environment. I'm so glad you're all here with us tonight. We are recording this and putting it on YouTube. So if you don't want to be seen, you can feel free to stop your video. But this will be on the YouTube channel, and you can also share this. We will have the link. You can go to YouTube, do a search for Schuylkill Center, and you can find all the other Thursday Night Lives, and you can also share that link with your friends who may have missed tonight's conversation. So saving the ark, religion, and the environment. In the last year, Thursday Night Live has tackled many topics. Beaver returning to Philadelphia, amazingly, plastic pollution, climate change, and much more. Tonight, we're wading into new water for our programming. The intersection of religion and the environment. Religion has a lot to say about the state of the environment, about stewardship of creation, about climate justice, about praying with our hands by caring for the planet. I'm so thankful that 4 wonderful religious leaders have agreed to join us for tonight's conversation. And I will stop sharing so you can actually see them if you go to speaker view. Tonight's very special guests are Reverend Gregory Holston, pastor of the Janes Memorial United Methodist Church in Germantown and former executive director of Power Philadelphia. Welcome, Reverend Holston.
I'm glad to be with you.
So glad you're with us. Thank you so much. Reverend Langdon Palmer is pastor of the Leverington Church in Roxborough, just down Ridge Avenue from the Schuylkill Center. It's his church's beautiful interior that we use in our photograph to promote tonight's event. Welcome, Reverend Palmer.
Great to be with you, Mike.
Thanks for coming. Rabbi Shawn Zevit is lead rabbi at Mishkan, Shalom, a reconstructionist synagogue in Roxborough, Manayunk. He is also a book author, recording artist, and coincidentally, an old friend. Welcome, Rabbi Shawn. Rabbi Shawn, I hope you're here.
Oh, I'm here. I'm
There
here
you are.
just in awe of you, silent.
Thank you. And Eileen Flanagan is the former board chair of the self-described scrappy environmental group, the Earth Quaker Action Team. That's Quaker as in Society of Friends. She's also a published author and speaker, and her next book is on the intersection of racial and environmental justice. Thank you for being here tonight, Eileen. Thank you.
Good to be here.
Your group's name is my favorite for an environmental group. I love Earth Quakers. That's just a brilliant name. So I wanted to begin the discussion tonight with a quick 1-minute sermon from each of our leaders. And we drew names out of a hat earlier tonight to determine the order. So you're up, Rabbi Shawn. One-minute sermon.
I brought the poet Ruth Bryn, a blessed memory, who I happened to know in my lifetime. And she wrote this poem. And so given the subject matter, let's remember that religion comes from the Latin relig, as in ligament. So let us begin by reconnecting to the earth, and we who are Adam, earth beings and earth people, from the very first lines of Genesis. Hail the hand that scattered space with stars, wrapped whirling world in bright blue blanket air, made worlds within worlds, elements in earth, souls within skins, every one a teeming universe, every tree a system of semantics, and pushed beyond probability to place consciousness on this cooling crust of burning rock. Oh, praise the hand, mind, heart, and soul, power or force that so enclose separated limited planets, trees, humans, yet breaks all bounds and borders to lavish on us light, love, and life. Ah, the trembling glory.
Thank you, Rabbi Shawn, very much. Thank you for that. Reverend Holston, I'm sorry, but you have to follow that.
It's hard, it's bad enough to follow an articulate clergy person like Rabbi Shawn, but it's even deeper to have to follow someone who is singing and you can't hold a note. So, but quickly, I would say in this 1 minute, Psalm 24, verse 1 comes to mind. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and those who dwell therein. Just that simple phrase that the earth is the Lord's recognizes that we do not own this planet. Yet our attitude oftentimes seems to be exactly that. We have recorder of deeds offices for buying property because we own our house and we own the land underneath it, and we say it is ours, but it really is not ours. Nothing in this world is ours. We are only stewards over it. We are called to care for it, and we therefore, being stewards, we are called to leave it in a better condition than we found it. And therefore, are we doing that on our planet? And what does leaving it better mean? There's a city near Mount Everest that had so much smog for 40 years, they could not see Mount Everest. And because of COVID-19, the cars did not drive as much because people were in their homes. And literally 30 days after the restrictions were put in, the smog rolled away. They could look at the majestic, powerful Mount Everest right out of their homes. What is leaving the world in a better place? Is the smog a better place? Or it's seeing the beauty that comes with that wonderful mountain? We have to ask ourselves those questions when God is calling us to real stewardship and not ownership. Hope that's 1 minute.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Reverend Holston. I really appreciate that. Just wanted to pause there for a moment and just consider that image. Thank you. Reverend Palmer.
Thank you. I'll try and keep it short. I'll try. I wanted to share with you guys just two texts that have really shaped the way I think about the environment, the creation, and it's kind of a fundamental to my theology. The first one is Genesis 1:20-22, and it says, God said, let the water teem with living creatures, let the birds fly above the earth and across the expanse of the sky. So God created the great creatures of the sea and every living kind and moving thing with which the water teems, according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them and said, be fruitful and increase in number and fill the water in the seas and let the birds increase on the earth. So you notice that God didn't say, I've created these things for their utility, as nothing more than raw material for human beings to make things out of. He didn't say they were worth making because of their utility, but rather because they were good in and of themselves. Their very being was good. And he delighted in seeing the waters teem with living creatures. And notice God doesn't just say to humans, be fruitful and multiply. He says it to all the creatures. And I take that to mean he's simply saying to all of us, flourish. God wants all the creatures of the earth to flourish, and human beings are part of that. And then the second is, some of you, I'm sure, may have heard of this, Psalm chapter 8, verses 3-4, which says, when I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place, what is man? What is man that you are mindful of him, the Son of Man that you care for him? And so I think we see, in this ancient text, this great humility and this awareness that we're not the center of the universe, and the smallness of humanity, and that the creation is precious and magnificent. And so for me, this awareness of the inherent value of the creation and our need to consider it and tend for it in humility are the two primary stances that we should bring toward the stewardship of the environment.
Thank you, Reverend Palmer. Thank you so much. Thank you. Eileen Flanagan, you reminded us as we all signed on earlier that Quakers don't give sermons. So we're asking you to do something out of your wheelhouse, but we love your thoughts.
That's fine. I was thinking instead of the kind of dogma or theology that's coherent that a lot of groups have, we focus a lot on the inward conscience, but we do have something we call testimonies, which are principles for how we think God is calling us to live in the world. And the ones that are most often cited are peace, equality, simplicity, integrity, stewardship, and community. In my own journey in working on environmental issues over the last few years, it's become more and more clear to me that all of those principles or testimonies are interconnected. In the same way that the natural world is interconnected, and everything we're learning about botany and science shows more and more how we can't harm one thread of the web of creation without harming the whole. The same is true of humanity and the way these principles interact. So, for example, environmental destruction hurts human beings in general, but disproportionately the people who are already hurt by inequality, whether it's racial inequality, economic inequality, or even gender inequality. Environmental destruction is causing war. So if peace is the issue that motivates people, we need to understand that already there are parts of the world where conflict is being fueled by drought, by lack of access to water and things like that. Simplicity, you know, Quakers are supposed to be known for our simplicity, but it is humbling to grapple with how much our consumption is out of proportion to the resources of the earth. So without going through all of them, I would say that my main message is that we have to look at these things holistically, and that yes, we have to care for creation and other species, and we have to recognize that we are one of those species who we are hurting in the way that we are currently dealing with the Earth's resources.
Thank you, Eileen. Thank you so much. Thank you to the four of you. Let me turn to the audience. Everybody, if you have questions, start getting them in chat and I'll start asking them. So you can help guide the conversation. Eileen, Chris asked you to list the principles again. Would you mind doing that?
Oh, sure. Peace, some people call them the spices. It depends on the order. Simplicity, peace, integrity, community, and equality.
Shawn, would you mind going back over one thing you said before? I think just to, so it's such a wonderful connection. I think most people might not know. The connection between Adam and Earth and name Adam is really extraordinary.
Thank you, Mike. It's funny how that's exactly what I was sitting with, even as I was hearing Eileen speak, that from the very beginning of the narrative in Genesis, and first of all, to understand that with total shout out to King James and bringing the Bible into English, not aligning itself totally with the Hebrew, the very first line of the Bible, the Torah, gets translated as in the beginning. And the Hebrew is the indefinite article. So there is no the beginning in Jewish thought. It is with beginning. So in this form of evolution, in this next take, this is how things panned out. And the Kabbalists said, well, what happened before? And they purport that in Jewish mysticism, that there were worlds existed before, but it's like having the chemical chart without any bonding agent. There was O's and H's and N's, but there was no gravity, there was no God force to bring things together. So everything collapsed in on itself. There was no gravitational pull to adhere to allow creation to manifest. That's the difference of this iteration. And so when we appear in the narrative on the sixth day, which even in traditional Jewish circles is not necessarily given to be a literal story, but rather a metaphorical one trying to lift up the course of evolving things, we are Adam. That is our name, Adam and Chava. Not Adam and Eve, but rather Adam, the being of earth, the earthling, and life, Chava. And so that is the name of the first two beings, the essence of life expressed through earth. And so the earth, Adama, and Adam are, intimately linked. And so the idea that we would even have a conversation about religion and environmentalism is already a duality that's not in the original idea.
That's wonderful. Thank you. And actually, since you have so much that beautiful water behind you, I once went into that first, those first opening lines to figure out when did God create water? It was already there at creation. It was already there. It was like, oh, that's kind of cool. Chris asked how long the recording is going to be available, by the way. So it'll be on for a while. Everything lives forever on the internet. So it'll be up there. So thank you, Chris. Do you have any reactions to anything you said to each other? Reverend Holston, Reverend Palmer, Eileen, anything that you all heard from each other that you want to react to before we move on?
Well, I just wanted to add to what you were saying about the water was already there. I believe that's true in many indigenous creation stories as well.
Right. So let me throw this big question at you, which is kind of the premise of why we're here. There's a really famous essay that came out more than 50 years ago on the Judeo-Christian roots of our environmental issues, written by a historian. Essentially, the commandment to dominate the earth is sort of central to why there are environmental issues at all. So as people who wrestle in this domain, I'm curious about your reaction to that. That there's a portion of people who have blamed essentially organized religion for our environmental ills. I know it's a big question, but I'm curious what you all think about that. Reverend Palmer, do you want to kick us off on that one? Can I put you on the spot? Did we lose you?
I just need to unmute.
There we are.
Sorry about that, you guys. I was cracking up that you asked me to go first, the sacrificial lamb here.
Well, you specifically called out creation, and when you were talking, so I thought,
yeah. So hopefully if this doesn't get a conversation going, nothing will.
Yeah.
I reject the whole premise for about 4 or 5 different reasons, and the first one is let's think about something else. Let's say that Martin Luther King was doing a protest down the street, and there were 2,000 people with him, and some guy in the back had a Molotov cocktail and he threw it. Would that mean that Martin Luther King's effort was not anti-violence, or no, not at all? What would it mean? Well, it would mean one of 2 things. It would either mean the guy in the back didn't understand the movement at all, or second, he was using the legitimacy of Dr. Martin Luther King's movement for his own agenda. He was hijacking the legitimacy of a movement for his own agenda. And so do I think that people have claimed to do really lousy things in the name of Christianity to the environment? Like, hey, it's okay for us to exploit things. Sure, I think people have done that. But if you look at the teachings of Jesus, there's just no way you can possibly align with that. When you think about the scripture I was talking about, again, the verse that they are quoting when they say that is in Genesis 1:28. It says God is talking and he says, "Fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and every living creature." And that idea of having dominion. But you got to remember this, just 16, 17 verses later, it says, and God took the man and put him in a Garden of Eden to dress it and keep it, or to work it and take care of it, to take care of it. And another translation says to cultivate it. And so I see all through the Jewish scriptures and the New Testament scriptures this incredible love for the environment, that this is a good and a beautiful thing. And I think that, I just think that narrative is too simple. It's an overly simple narrative. It would be almost like saying, well, the reason we have so much environmental destruction is because of the Enlightenment. Well, I mean, there are parts of the Enlightenment. If you view the universe as nothing more than bowling, pool balls and interactions, all it is stuff. It's not animated in any way. It's not enchanted. Well, you can see how people might go to exploiting something that's just raw resources. But certainly there's much more to the Enlightenment, including some really great things. So I think the reason I react so strongly is that because I forget who said it, Rabbi, it might've been you, that, yes, it was you, Rabbi, that the idea that, environmentalism and faith or religion would be like some dialectic there.
Right.
No, I mean, it's all one. You know, the idea that there's this creation that was created good and that we are only a part of it and we are to steward it. That's key. And let me add one more thing and I'll be quiet. The other thing I want to add is, when was that written? What we just read? You know, we can argue, and I would love to hear other views, but let's say it was written 4,000 years ago. When you're in the middle of the wilderness, when you say to subdue the world, what you mean is, like here in the Northeast, that would mean cut enough firewood so you don't freeze to death in the winter. It would mean plant crops so that you're not hunting and gathering. You're not like locusts that just shred a whole area, move to the next area, shred that area. Right. The very way that you're subduing the land means you're going to care more about it because you're not going anywhere.
The fire not only keeps you warm, it also keeps the 16 animals who will eat you away.
Exactly. So we're talking to people where there's a big world and we're very small.
Right.
And now we are in a very different place. We have great power. Right. I mean, you know, nuclear power. We have the ability to do terrible things. And so I think it's important to remember, you know, how privileged we are in the sense of having the kind of culture and resources and the powers we have, right. As opposed to somebody who's like just trying to survive, you know, in the middle of the desert.
Thank you. Reverend Holston, there's a lot to chew on there. Anything you want to react to?
It was definitely a lot, and I thank Langdon for his words. Well, in terms of whether faith or religion is the cause of the exploitation of the environment, we need to recognize just about every system goes through cycles of where they're the reform, they actually are making the change and actually are creating a better world. And then at some point that system starts to be exploited by those same ambitions that lie in the flesh, that our Christian faith says lie in the flesh of all of us: ambition, jealousy, envy, exploitation. And so oftentimes our faith, therefore our religion, our Christian religion, has been used by those same ambitions to be able to justify the exploitations of people. I would say just about every system is used to justify the exploitation of people and of this world. And those who can go and find the core central principles of that faith or of that system, most of the time we'll find that change is possible when we go back and actually find what we really are believing in. And so I agree with Langdon, what he's saying there. But I want people to understand this is what happens with every kind of system. And we just have to recognize and decide which part of the fight are we going to be on. The fight for exploitation, or the fight to really bring love and peace and joy and prosperity and security and wholeness, including the world around us as well. Which side are we deciding to be on in this fight?
Eileen or Shawn, you want to jump into this?
I would love to jump in. I really appreciate that, Reverend Holston, and I resonate with it. I recently was reading a sermon by a Louisiana preacher about why slavery was, you know, the Christian thing to do. People's ability to twist up any faith tradition to justify their own greed, I think is something that, you know, runs across faiths. That said, the thing I want to push back on of what Langdon said is that I don't think the role of Christianity is like one lone troublemaker at the back of the crowd. I think we have to, at least someone who was raised in the Christian tradition, I was raised in the Catholic Church, and then, you know, to my Irish mother's great horror, went to a Quaker school and became a Quaker. But the Catholic Church justified colonialism with a number of papal edicts that came up with a theological justification for war, came up with a theological justification for taking the lands of anyone who wasn't Christian. If you're not Christian, we can have your stuff. And I heard Naomi Klein once describe colonialism, the root of it, as basically Europeans started running out of their own trees and killing off all their beaver. And so they went looking for other people's land to exploit because they were not living within their means. So this point about greed, I think it relates very much to how we have not cared for the earth. I think when we look at pre-industrial societies or small local rural communities, people do live the way Langdon described, caring for the earth that sustains them. But colonialism really ushered in this whole system of producing for sale, which changed people's relationship with the land pretty fundamentally. If you read the history of deforestation in the United States, you know, indigenous people had cared for those woods, had used, you know, a bit of wood here or there, and Europeans came in and felled the whole forest.
You know, can I just jump in for a moment? I'm sorry. What we learned a month ago on these Thursday nights is that actually the Lenape practiced fire ecology. They did extensive burns to cultivate oaks and hickories for their nuts. It was sustainable and it worked, and the forest was forest. But anyway, yeah.
No, that's right. That's right. There was burning, but it was in a sense of caring for the whole.
Right.
How much can we get with a very short time horizon in mind?
Correct.
So I think we have to grapple with that religion has been used in a particularly harmful way.
Right. Chris weighed in also that John Locke was the one who had that theory, she thinks.
Mike,
Shawn,
could I
yeah,
add something to that? Thank you.
Please.
And I'm appreciating the perspectives because, you know, to walk the path of faith is, I remember being touched by a Catholic monk, Thomas Merton. You can tell the insecurity of a person's faith by the loudness with which they proclaim their religion. And so not wanting to be an apologist for this, a lot of it banks into who has power over whom and when and where. And so, you know, here we are in the Jewish calendar about to observe next year, every 7 years, the Shemitah, which is biblically rooted in terms of every 7 years letting the land go fallow, you know, reminding ourselves of our stewardship, Langdon, as you mentioned before, using that term, and but also that we're to forgive debts and that we're forgive each other. So it was a human relational dynamic, not separating earthling from earth in that regard, that forgiveness needed to be letting the earth be as well as each other that way. And at the same time, here we are in contemporary world, North America, or the contemporary state of Israel, where this will be observed. And the question is, how are we using the land? Who's getting exploited? What are happening to Palestinians? What's happening environmentally? So, you know, when we are suddenly in power versus not in power, or as powerful in our own evolution, there's no running and hiding from these questions of faith, as Reverend Holston, as you put it that way. You know, people who pronounce to not necessarily have a particular religion, but are humanistic, going for values, we face the same piece and challenge as well. One thing I want to go back to in thinking again of the original Hebrew and the mindset of the Middle East or the East, think of different understanding of what it means to have mastery versus domination, which is again an English translation of the Hebrew. So when I think of mastery, I'm dating myself, but I'm thinking of Kung Fu, you know, the television series from the 70s. I'm thinking of the Jedi Knights. I'm thinking of all these places of the master at the ashram. Or
you know what I was thinking of? Going back to water, I'm thinking of a ship on the ocean. You can have mastery over the craft of sailing, but you'll never dominate the ocean.
Right, because it has to be in relation to.
Right.
That's the whole definition of that.
Right.
Or you're not a master anymore. You're actually insecure and fearful. So just some ideas about how we can reclaim some of those original understandings to both challenge misbehavior, but also take a stand for justice. And I just want to add this one other piece that Reverend Holston and that Greg, you've inspired me over the years in our shared work for justice, is that we don't separate climate and environmental issues from racial and social justice either. That when you lived in a part of the town, or many people do live in Philadelphia, where it's suddenly deemed okay to put the gas plant or to not have environmental controls, and surprise, surprise, those are often in communities of color or people who have less economic means. We can't separate aspects of racial and social justice from environmental and climate concerns and still claim to be people of faith. And that is a piece that I don't want to lose sight of,
No, it's
even
true.
as we're talking about.
And there's a new phrase that's entered our conversation of fence line communities. The fence line where the factory stops, where the power plant stops, where the refinery stops. Those communities just outside the fence line are the ones who are most impacted. Reverend Holston, any reaction from anything Shawn just offered?
Well, certainly. Thank you, Rabbi Shawn, so much for just lifting that up. And much of our work that I've been working with those here on this panel has been around that intersection of racial justice and in the environment. The recognition that in the city of Philadelphia, roughly 30% of our children are suffering from asthma. Some places is 40 to 50% are suffering from asthma. Very much familiar with my neighborhood in South Philadelphia, who for years suffered under incredible amounts of pollution from the refinery plant that was close by, that even my grandfather actually worked at and was retired from. But those pollution went to his neighbors, his friends, and the number of cancers that are in that community, that had been in that community for years, is extraordinary. And these frontline, you want to call it frontline or just call it exploited communities where we're very comfortable having that level of pollution that we would never accept in our own backyard, accept it in places where people of color live and suffer. My home church is in South Philadelphia, and I remember as I became a pastor or became a minister at that church, how many funerals I was there with people who had suffered from those cancers, and I never made the connection between the plant and the many cancers and many funerals that we attended, or even my own daughter's asthma. I never made the connection. She was 12 years old, living in South Philadelphia. Up till she was 12, she suffered from asthma in terrible ways. But as soon as we moved out of South Philadelphia and moved to New Jersey, within less than a month, the asthma disappeared and has never returned. We know now the exhaust from the refinery, the exhaust from the buses on our street poisoned her. Let's say it right. Poisoned her, and are poisoning children right now in Philadelphia. And we comfortably go to sleep every night with that happening, and happening in the tens of thousands of ways, even much more than even the gun violence that we're facing in the city. That poisoning is still continuing, and we're comfortable with it, and we go along with it.
If there's any good news, I think fewer people are comfortable now than perhaps ever before, if that means anything.
I think, yes, I believe that is true. I work with those right on this panel here who lift it up all the time. The recognition that we really still don't have. We still don't really completely comprehend that, and what a clean energy policy really means, not just for saving the planet, which, by the way, the planet's going to be here no matter what. It's a question about saving us. The planet's going to be here,
right?
But have more concern about that question of saving the planet than stopping the poisoning of children right now, and that should drive our clean energy policy, particularly in communities of color.
Agreed.
We want to build a broad base of Black and white, Latino around clean energy, around climate change. It means taking concerns for those individuals who are suffering right now, right as we speak right now, and lifting those up for the reason we need to change our policies.
Yeah. Mike, as a dynamic, what just happened is an example in the first half of how we were talking about comforting and providing support and solace for those afflicted. And in this moment, religion became the force for afflicting those who are comfortable. And so, none of us skipped a beat, but I just want to notice the role of that dynamic can play, that it's not just about making everything okay. And in fact, I was reminded, Reverend Holston, as you were talking about the rabbinic saying, a couple of thousand years old, and understanding that different traditions hold messianic times differently. But in this rabbinic teaching, if one is out planting a sapling, a baby tree, and it's significant that that is the object of the story, and someone runs up to you and says, the Messiah has just arrived, first finish planting the tree, then go join the party. That's your job.
Right.
I was-
Eileen, imagine you want to get us some words in here. This is your next book.
Yeah, exactly what I was going to say. I was going in the same direction as Rabbi Shawn, because I've been interviewing people around the country who are living in fence line or frontline communities. And again, I'm struck by how many people articulate their faith as either what got them doing the work or what sustains them, even when they're threatened with arrest or intimidated, or in some cases get death threats for taking on powerful corporations. It's been very striking. So that is actually becoming more and more a theme of the book. I've been thinking a lot about Dr. King's quote, "Power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic." And I think that to turn this around, we really need both. We really need the kind of grassroots organizing that builds grassroots power. But if it's fueled by love, which for many people means rooted in their faith, I think it will be much stronger, much more able to make the kind of changes that we need. And that is a good news that I see in movements that I talk to, that people are getting that connection more, I think, than in the past.
Right. Reverend Palmer, anything you want to add to this piece of the conversation?
No, I think that's been great. Thank you.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. We do have a comment in chat, getting a little political, that this conversation gives us some hope, and that also that the president shows signs of addressing environmental injustice. This is a good sign. What do you all think about that? And another person wonders how far the president is going to be able to go to solve these issues. So just a little bit of politics for a moment. Anybody want to jump into that one?
I think it's wonderful that he's taking some broad steps around infrastructure that may make a difference in terms of climate as well. Yeah, I'm kind of like what AOC said regarding that $2 trillion. As big as it is, it's not big enough.
No, right. She wants like 10 trillion.
Yes, and we have spent the last 40 years not really developing our infrastructure, and certainly not developing in a way that deals with it and use it to promote clean energy. And so 40, 50, maybe 60 years since the interstate highway was built, we haven't done anything major. And so come with just 2 trillion over it was 8 years. We need much more than that. And you look at every other country, what they're doing with their trains and their all of their highways. It's making us look so far behind where we need to be. And so yes,
yeah,
excited, but not enough resources.
I think there's a justice component here as well, because we keep building interstates. We don't want to invest in mass transit.
And we don't want to invest in communities. North
Right.
Philadelphia had
Right.
major disinvestment from the 1960s. It was called white flight, as businesses and companies that were white owned and white controlled left out of the city for the suburbs, and then went to the south, and then went overseas. But they left North Philadelphia vacant, with vacant warehouses and toxic buildings. And 60 years of that disinvestment, people are still living there waiting for those businesses to come back. We need the kind of broad-based investment in our communities.
Yeah.
We need really a Marshall Plan for many of our neighborhoods. A real Marshall Plan. We rebuilt Europe after World War II. We need to rebuild our own neighborhoods right here in our own country, and use them for clean energy, so that we can stop poisoning our children.
We have a member of the Unitarian Universalist Church weighing in that they're concerned too, and they're enjoying the conversation. So thank you. Eileen, can I come back to you for one quick moment? You
Sure.
mentioned a quote by Dr. King. There's one that he also said in a very different context that I hope he wouldn't mind if I borrowed, but he used, it's a great turn of phrase, the fierce urgency of now. And I just so feel that with climate, and every day that we don't address climate, it just gets more fierce. And it's kind of like we're willfully, a big chunk of the country is willfully disregarding the science about COVID. We are equally willfully disbelieving the science or our eyes with climate. So I'm curious about the whole climate issue, its urgency, and how the role religion can play here.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to go back a second, and I think it connects in terms of, I'm very excited to see Biden do more. And it's important to recognize that the sense of urgency that got him to do it came from young people promoting the Green New Deal. And the Green New Deal came from communities of color. People in Brooklyn who, after Hurricane Sandy, realized that they coined the phrase bouncing forward instead of bouncing backwards, that they could use the rebuilding that had to happen to create jobs and create more justice in their communities. Same with Oakland, which had a solar jobs vision long, long before. And I think it connects to your question about urgency, because I think the people who feel most vulnerable to climate change do feel that urgency. I mean, look at kids going on strike by the thousands. They get it that their generation is most vulnerable. Communities of color often don't talk about climate change. They talk, as Reverend Holston did, about asthma and cancer, and the immediate effects of fossil fuels are right there. Like who's worried about 2050, when you're burying somebody else this week. But I do think it's those more vulnerable groups who are bringing the urgency that has finally hit the White House, at least a little bit. In terms of the rest of us, I think we need to figure out how to tap into that without just using fear. One of the things I struggle with is, so I'll just give the example. One of the things that motivated me to start doing civil disobedience around climate change, I had been in the Peace Corps in Southern Africa, in Botswana, in my 20s. And I found out that the predictions are that 180 million people will die in sub-Saharan Africa from climate change in the 21st century. That statistic just knocked me off a chair. 180 million, why aren't we all just like blocking all the driveways to the fossil fuel infrastructure? But I know, even though I just shared it with you, I know that doesn't motivate most people. It's too abstract.
Right.
People don't relate to Africa the way it made a heart connection to me. And so there's something that I think we really have to grapple with about speaking truth about what we're up against without just sending people to a place of despair. And I think it's part of what's exciting about things like the Green New Deal and the interconnection of issues. It's offering people a positive vision for change, not just horrific predictions.
Hey, Rabbi Shawn, we have a comment here before you talk. Judaism states that we don't have to complete the work, but neither can we desist from it. We do what we can.
Like we are one brain, one brotherhood. That's exactly. You interrupted me about to start to make a comment about that. I noticed that Madeline had put that in there.
There we are. Okay, good.
And this ties in exactly to what Eileen was saying. We need to have the conversation that's far-ranging like we have now. So we're not separating politics and religion. We're not separating, faith and the natural order of things and the ecosystem. Right. And at the same time, how we do that relationally, coming back to that original idea of worlds had been in place but collapsed because they didn't have the relational glue, the gravity, the God force to bring them together, is often on my mind. And as I often will tell our kids, 75% of whom now for their bar mitzvah projects are choosing something related to environmental causes, cleaning up the Schuylkill, planting. One of them just decided at Mishkan that they want to plant an herb garden because it should be something that lives beyond the project and that can potentially, feed other people. This is where they're coming from. Even the collective tzedakah, the collective offering that we raise every year, last year or 2 years ago, the kids wanted to donate it to an environmental cause, and they came up with 4 ideas: oceans, global this, whatever. It actually ended up, Reverend Holston, I don't know if you remember this, Rabbi Julie came and received the check at Mishkan on behalf of Power, because the kids wanted to give it to the Power Climate Justice Initiative, because it would make a difference in our city to people here and now who we have a connection with. They weren't interested. In fact, they were rendered inert by and talked about how powerless they felt in the wake of the magnitude of some of the issues. So it is not ours to necessarily complete the task. Rabbi Hillel, a couple thousand years ago on the Thursday Night Live Schuylkill panel, mentioned that, as Madeline lifted that up. But neither is it to sit back and go, oh, it's too big, and if not now, when, and if not me, who? So those are an example of some of the Jewish faith questions that we don't want to let ourselves off the hook for. And as I often tell people, if you're on your way to the Save the Whale March at the harbor, and you're bulleting down and you accidentally sideswipe somebody because you're so passionate about that environmental cause, you pull over and you exchange insurance and you miss the rally because you've endangered somebody in the name of your cause. And sometimes that kind of gets a little bit blurry in both faith and environmental issues when we become fundamentalist about whatever point of view we have, and we cease to be relational.
I do want to switch a little bit. We're going to go for about 10 more minutes, so we'll start coming in for a landing a little bit. But a question was asked if any of you have prayers to offer for somebody who wants to, like a daily prayer for somebody who wants to do environmental justice work. It's an interesting question. Any thoughts?
I don't have any specific, well, go ahead.
Here's a little
I
thought.
don't have a prayer either. I listen to the song "I Am Willing" by Holly Near
Ah.
whenever I need motivation.
That's great.
So I'll just pluck. I happen to have handy a couple of them here. So Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav, one of the early Hasidic revolutionaries: Master of the universe, grant me the ability to be alone. May it be my custom to go outdoors each day among the trees and grass and growing things, and there may be I alone, and enter into prayer. And so I just want to offer, the prayer in his name. It's not so much about the prayer for the environmentalists, but the prayer to get into deep relationship with the environment, with the trees, with all of the earth of which we are a part. And that itself is the prayer fulfilled. That it, as Rabbi Mordechai Liebling, who's a member of Mishkan, mentioned the other day, he said, because of the pandemic, I missed being outside of Mishkan at this time of year, because we offer our prayers and all the birds would be nesting and fluttering around. And that is part of the prayer of the springtime. And I'm not hearing that prayer right now. And so I think that listening is as much of our prayer as it is liturgical.
Reverend Palmer, let's come back to you on thoughts on caring for creation, because one of the big environmental issues is the loss of creation, frankly, that species are vanishing. And I keep looking for the religious community to step up in a more significant way and talk about we can't afford to lose creation. Each species is unique and they're going.
Yeah. I would add to that request, the question of a prayer.
Yeah.
I would suggest Psalm 19. And this is one that I often go outside and start my day with. And I look up at the heavens, I look at the earth, and this is obviously, Judeo-Christian tradition, but this to me is a beautiful example of how being totally aware of the environment and the creation and the creator of the creation all go together. So that's probably one of my favorites, is Psalm 19. Again, you guys, I don't want to come across as the cranky guy, but one of my thoughts is—
You're not at all, don't worry.
Okay, one of my thoughts is that the issue that we all struggle with is that whatever issue we are most passionate about, we don't get why everyone else isn't as passionate as we are. And I love how everyone here has been talking tonight about how all these issues kind of integrate. Although I agree with that, I think it gets very tricky. to figure out how all that works. But I think that one of the problems is that there's a lot of issues right now. You know,
Yeah.
my 89-year-old mom turned to me today and said, is there any hope for this world? I mean, she just, you know, just so many problems in so many dimensions. And so I'm not using that as a cop out, but
No, but
you know,
there were many problems before we got a pandemic, and now we got the pandemic overlayered. Go ahead.
right. And well, and I'm going to say this, like, I'm a very simple guy. And also I would say I was an atheist. And in my early, my first half of my career, I had a real job. I was a process control engineer. So I'm really into science. And I'm also very sensitive and respectful of people who don't buy anything in my worldview. But I am a kind of basic guy, and I believe that what needs to happen is that people's hearts have to change. And I believe, yes, people we need education, but I think raising our children, as the rabbi suggests, raising our children to truly love the creation, to focus, and I hear don't focus so much on the fear, and I'm really about that. I am much more on, this is an amazing world. I can't believe we get to be here. I can't believe I get to wake up. You know, every morning I wake up and I go, I can't believe I get to be here.
Right.
And I think that as we help our children and those around us at that loving of the creation, this beautiful, amazing gift we've given, and not just a source of raw resources, that begins to move the needle. And I think the other needle that can move, again, as an engineer, I'm really into details. I'm really into, don't give me some simple black and white switch. I want to see statistics. I want to see results. I want to see cost analysis. But I do think the idea of helping people begin to understand the true cost of our lifestyle, not in a shaming way, not in a guilt way, but just like, hey, this is reality, could be really helpful. And I'll just give one anecdote from my own life. One of the greatest, so I love wilderness exploration. I love outdoor sports. My favorite part of being in Philly is the Wissahickon Creek, Forbidden Drive. I'm a rock climber. I just love where we are. But one of the greatest trips I ever had in my life was a 15-day whitewater rafting trip down through the Grand Canyon. No tour guides, no professionals. It was just us doing it. And we had to be so careful because it's such a precious resource that we literally had to put plastic tarps down to catch any crumbs that would fall from our meals, because that would attract fire ants and skew the environment. We had to pack everything out. We had to pack our poop out, right? Everything had to go. It was an amazing trip. Now, everybody on that trip loved the environment. We loved everything about it. And then at the end of the trip, well, it was time to take all the waste that 20 people had accumulated for a 15-day trip down the Grand Canyon, and we dumped it in a landfill. I believe it was on Native American land, right? I mean, it was a contract, but like, we'll take your crap. And in that moment, I saw the true cost, or at least a partial glimpse of my eco, tourism. And so I think, again, I don't think this is simple, but I do think helping us begin to understand, like, what is the true cost about the way I live is a way to begin to bring that change.
Reverend Holston, can I turn to you? Any thoughts on this?
I agree absolutely that who has the most hopeful message is the one that wins. People are moved with hope much more than they move with fear. And so, yes, the Green Deal and talking about a world and what it looks like, a world of clean energy, a world of racial equity, a world of where we have moved from fossil fuels to this kind of clean energy. What that actually looks like and how that will be a better world than what we have now is the messaging that must go forward. That we have, I love what Eileen said a little while ago. They didn't want to build back; they wanted to build forward. I think that's the key. We want to build a better city than what we have now. We want to build better homes. Most of these homes in Philadelphia were built in the 1920s. Come on now,
Yeah.
can we knock them all down and build something for right now, and that could last and to be energy efficient and run on in different and new creative ways? Can't we? Why are we still with this same housing stock? We can build that. We have the resources. They keep cutting taxes, but the reality is we're still the wealthiest nation in the world. There's nothing stopping us from pouring, again, trillions of dollars into creating a new world, in a new city, in a new state. That is the vision that has to go forward. I grew up as a child, and I love the Jetsons. I love my boy Elroy, the daughter Judy. I loved all that. The dog Astro. But I love the fact that 60 years from then, I was supposed to be living in the sky. I was supposed to be having a car that drove around in the sky. I was supposed to be having a different life than what the same house that I was living in as a kid. And
there's a science fiction writer who said, I wish I knew which one, he said, the future just ain't what it used to be.
Yes. But see, we could have that. We just stopped dreaming. We went to the moon in 1969. And come on now, if we could have done that with the ingenuity of those scientists who had computers that didn't have the power of this thing I have in my hand right now, yet they could go to the moon and back, surely we could make a better city than we have right now, that it makes it prosperous for everyone, where everyone has a quality school, quality education. We don't even have internet capacity for everybody. That's shocking. We can build that better city, but we got to have the creativity and the vision to say that's what we want to do.
Mm-hmm. It's at just after 8 o'clock. We're going to begin to sign off. And I think, inspired by Reverend Holston, we're going to ask each of you for one more message of hope. Reverend Holston will come to you last. We'll begin. Rabbi Shawn, you started us off. Why don't you kick us off here this round?
Well, acting as a team again, Reverend Holston's words inspire me, as they often do. And I was thinking of you, giving that old time religion, get me religged and reconnected. It's the same theme when we finish every Shabbat morning, or Monday and Thursday, or Saturday afternoon when we read from Torah, from the actual scroll, and we put it back in the ark. And the last words we say, Chadesh Yameinu Kekedem, renew our days, renewables, renew our souls, yep, as in days of old. And one of my teachers, and along with Rabbi Arthur Waskow, Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalom of blessed memory, was also a Gaian thinker, thinking of the ecology of the planet. In fact, it's when Reb Zalman saw the Apollo picture, the first one of our planet, he said, from here on in, that is the only religious icon that can display unity. Everything else is a subset of this precious blue planet, twirling in praise and must serve that. But he reminded us that phrase, renew us these days as of old, is not bring us back to the old time religion. It's bring us back to how we felt when we first felt Spirit moving through us. So it's not that I want to turn the clock back, Back to the Future. It's I want to be right now at 61, remembering the awe of the universe when I was 12 and I had forts and paths and I spent hours a day out, maneuvering through and grabbing the garter snake and the tree frog and making them smooch each other and let them back again. These were things I was up to. That's what I want faith to remind me of. Right. So thank you, Mike, for convening us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Reverend Palmer.
Again, for me, just very simple, during COVID, especially in the beginning of all this, when none of us had any idea what was going on, the scripture that just always resonated with me was, my times are in your hands. And I take that literally. I believe there is a maker of heaven and earth. I believe I am his creature and my times are in his hands. And that does give me great hope. It is not a panacea, because obviously for a Christian like me, a major part of my understanding is this world is bent and corrupted. Like we human beings we are bent and corrupted, and we have bent and corrupted the world. And I personally believe unless I get to that point of self-awareness where I can see that in myself, I'm not going to be at a place where I can have true hope. And so my hope comes from that conviction of mine that every one of us here tonight, every one of us is known by name, that God knows every hair on your head, and that you are precious in his sight, and that he wants to use you in good and beautiful ways. And I love the quote you guys made this. I'll end with this. I love the quote. I'm not familiar where in Judaism that comes from, but that idea that we're not going to finish the work, but we can still do some real good right here, right now. Amen to that. That's exactly right.
Thank you. Eileen Flanagan.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed this and resonated with so much of what's been said, including the miraculousness of the world and the importance of grounding in that. I would add that saying, praying with your feet, that I love from Rabbi Heschel during the Civil Rights Movement, I think is part of what faith has to offer. It can bolster our courage to tackle difficult issues and give us hope beyond what might be reasonable to expect. And so I think that's what I want to carry forward, is the faith to pray with my feet.
Reverend Holston will give you the last word tonight.
Wow. Thank you, Reverend Palmer. Thank you, my good friend, Rabbi Shawn, who I miss and need to see more often now. And Eileen, we did a lot of walking together in the streets of Philadelphia. So I just thank you for all the work you continue to do, and miss you as well. I think what we want to leave here with is my scriptural text, 1 John, reminds us that perfect love casts out all fear. That the power of God's love is what must motivate us. And so when we look at our children who are being poisoned by asthma, the love of God, not the fear of the poison or the fear of the planet being destroyed, but a love for the children and a love for the community and a love for changing and transforming how we live, because it's better for us and better for those who are around us. The love must motivate us. And if we work on that, if we just work on loving people more, it will change our policies. We are now in an era now where we're starting to dream again. We've spent 40 years of not dreaming, of believing that government cannot do, people cannot do, we cannot do. There's nothing we can do with these problems. We have to make government smaller. We have to make our dreams smaller. No, now is the change, and we have a new generation that's coming forward to believe again that we can create something better right here on earth. And that's the dream that I want people to see. So whatever you're dreaming about right now and thinking about in this world, I want you to believe we can do it. We can do it. We can do it. And you can do it. And this is the time to dream again.
Thank you all. This has been a lovely conversation. Thank you so very much. I'd love to reconvene and do this again. This is just such a pleasure for me. So thank you all. Especially want to thank all four of you for coming right after Easter, and Shawn for right after Passover. So Easter celebrates the resurrection, and nature is sort of going through its rebirth right now. And Shawn, Passover is getting through that narrow place, and we got a lot of narrow places to get through. So thank you all for that. Our guests tonight are Reverend Gregory Holston, pastor of the James Memorial United Methodist Church in Germantown; Eileen Flanagan, author and former leader of the Earth Quaker Action Team; Pastor Langdon Palmer of the Leverington Church in Roxborough; and Rabbi Shawn Zevit of Mishkan Shalom in Manayunk. Thanks to each of you. Thanks to everybody who joined us over Zoom tonight. We appreciate it so much. Next week, we are opening an art show with Rob Carter. And in 2 weeks, we're celebrating Earth Day together at 7 o'clock for an hour-and-a-half special. So thank you all. Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Thank you to our panelists. Thank you.
Sisters, great to be with you all.
Thank you.
Great again, be with all of you. Take care.
Thank you.
And to all of you people who were names, we love you and we picture your faces.
Thanks for all the commentary. Thanks, everybody.
Uh,
Have a great night.